And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage. We're two friends that have been playing D&D a long time. While we both love lots of other RPGs, D&D's 2nd edition mining rules has us digging for player input. That's a really bad one there, but we're going to roll with it. Hi, I'm Ange, and I have been gaming for most of my life. I started with 1st edition, and I haven't stopped yet. I love RPGs so much that I started talking and writing about them all the time. So I've been part of Gnome Stew since 2014, and I've been doing podcasts since 2017.
Hi, I'm Jared. I wrote this really long introduction, but I'm just not feeling it tonight, so I'm just going to let you know I am old, and I was young when I started playing D&D to begin with, and I have stuff at Gnome Stew, and I have stuff at whatdoiknowjr.com, so if you'd like to read those, you can find my stuff there. After we look at the games we're running in the campaign journal, we'll be talking about incorporating player ideas into your campaigns. Then we'll have some recommendations of D&D related content for you to check out in our downtime research segment.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WDND the Role Player. Now we're going to McElroy McKinney and the Bardic College.
Until D&D 3rd edition arrived, there was a limited number of ways that your ability scores would change. Now, if you were lucky, you might find a magic item or make a wish to increase them, but even wishes were a little bit stingy on the personal improvement front, often requiring multiple wishes to raise an ability score more than 1 point. On the other hand, there were also a few ways to lower your ability scores, ranging from monsters to cursed magic items. You may be asking yourself, how long did it take to recover your ability score damage? Ha! You think you've recovered ability score damage? Man, you may want to sit down before we talk about level drain.
Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
Since we last talked, I had to skip a session of the Old Margrave game. Both myself and Dahlia's player were attending Buckeye Game Fest in Columbus, Ohio that weekend. It's a great little con that's trying to bring a stronger RPG track to the event schedule. I had success running Tales from the Loop and Vaesen, and while I didn't play them, I saw that Shadow Dark and Dragon's Bane were both being run at other tables. So fantasy RPGs were well represented.
Nice.
We did get to play the first session in the final run of the City of Cowls campaign. It feels a little odd calling it City of Cowls because we are so very far from the city of Indus at this point. Currently, the Thundercranes, the name of our party, are in the Eastern Lands trying to unite the Dragonborn barbarian clans to help push back against a demonic invasion that's ravaging the world. Basically, it was a mission from the gods to go do this thing. So at the beginning of the session, there was a little time debating how to handle things going forward. At the end of the previous run of the campaign, we had helped merge the Rage Drakes with the Moon Owls into a newly formed clan called the Rage Drakes. As this session started up, we kind of had to do some higher level troop management type stuff because we were a little more in leadership roles, while our Dragonborn barbarian is technically the leader of the Rage Drakes clan. The rest of us are kind of treated as her advisors. So we ended up deciding to send some of our warriors and scouts to the south to see if they could find the remains of survivors of the Moon Owls and also some of the Sun Pythons that we believe may have gotten completely wiped out. Then our party, plus some additional warriors and scouts, were going to go northeast towards where they have the annual meeting of all the clans called the Gashkorum. It's a gathering place for all the clans to gather and deal with differences and plans and alliances and all that type of stuff. And then we left behind kind of the women, the children, the elderly, and some guardians at this ancient wizard tower, which was warded in such a way that it was like, one city block's worth of protected area that the demons couldn't enter. And then we went on our ways. And we also set up some sort of nightly sending program to basically keep in touch with everyone.
If you hadn't mentioned those were barbarian clans, it's D&D, I would have completely believed that you were fusing owls and drakes together to make owl dragons.
Along our journey, things were surprisingly quiet. The night was strange, with the moon kind of behaving oddly. And a day or two later, we found out, maybe not why, but a little more specific about the oddness. We came across these giant worms that were eating a hole in the world. Now, I don't just mean they were digging down into the world. They were literally eating the world and creating a void. And that was when we saw that the moon, the weird moon up in the sky, was actually an eye, and it was watching us. Fairy elder gods type of weirdness. These things were not demons. We don't know what they are. It was very weird. We fought the worms and seemed to stop the void hole from becoming bigger. It was an odd fight for me as Dove because I cast, I think, 2 spells. I cast Sunbeam at one point and just kept moving that around the battlefield to hurt the worms and hurt the void hole, which would hurt the eye in the sky. And then I cast Lightning Bolt at one point. It was all very weird. In the end, we realized we had no idea how to fix the void hole, so we were just gonna kind of have to leave a sign posted say, beware of void hole, and continue on, because we're pretty sure that fixing it will require dealing with this whole demonic invasion and tearing of the reality between, the abyss and the mortal plane. We ended the session by getting to Gashkorum and meeting up with the other 3 clans that had gathered there. Those 3 were relatively unscathed, and we were able to determine that the further east you got, the more insulated you were from the demonic invasion, as it seemed to be very much focused to the west, where the Sunlands are and where the city of Indus is. There was some kind of posturing and all of this, and we kind of set up to have to prove ourselves to the clans that are there before they'll consider joining with us or anything like that. There are 2 remaining clans that have not been heard from. One of them we've got a little bit of an issue with because in Ree's backstory, she was sent to this clan to marry its young chief and become its wise woman. She liked hitting things instead. So she basically challenged the young chief to a battle to the death. She won. Standing by their honor, they didn't kill her outright. They just exiled her and sent her away to die in the desert. And she eventually made it to the Sunlands, where eventually she made it to our party. That clan still has been, their relations with the Rage Drakes was pretty weakened by that. And so we're not sure how they're going to handle Ree showing up saying, hey, I'm your boss now. So we are going to go after the other clan, which I think are the Crimson Vipers, the Red Vipers, something like that. Either way, we'll be playing that the Saturday after recording this, and then the following week, I will be running the Old Margrave again. So the next time Jared and I talk, I have a lot more to talk about.
It seems to be kind of amazing because either I have 2 or 3 things going on, or I have nothing. So since our last recording, no Midgard game, no Curse of Strahd. I have both of them scheduled. They should be happening again soon. I did get another Tales of the Valiant Thrones and Bones game scheduled. It's not going to happen right away, but it is scheduled. It's on the calendar.
Turns out me and one of the other players have the complete opposite schedules. I'm available on the days he is not available. He is available on the days I am not available. So I think we have a date at the end of the month that actually lines up.
Thankfully, because work is going completely insane. I work in education, and it's getting to the end of the school year, and also we're implementing a new school information system. You don't need to know that, but there's just lots going on. Anyway, I actually have prepped the Midgard game and the Curse of Strahd game far enough ahead that I don't even have to worry about prepping them. So thankfully, everything can go haywire in real life while I sit back and look at all the prep that I've done.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
Moving on into the Dungeon Master's Workshop, when people talk about designing a campaign, our focus is usually on the Dungeon Master's ideas. It's expected that the world is entirely their creation, from the geography to the culture to the overarching plot point that will run through the game. Or if they're running something out of a book, it's still something they've chosen. It's still something they are completely controlling. But if you've listened to us for any length of time, you know that we advocate for making it about the player characters. So, how do you incorporate the players' ideas into your campaign in this kind of environment where it's generally considered the Dungeon Master's purview to control it all? Where does this idea come from? From having the campaign be collaboratively built between the players and the DM. What kind of nonsense is this?
To be honest, I would argue that early in the game, when most of the game was, here is a dungeon, here is a place for you to rest, that seems like it's not a lot of player collaboration, but a lot of that was, how far are we going to delve into the dungeon? When are we going to take our breaks? What are we going to do in town? How long are we going to rest up? And a lot of that was player driven because most of these things were dungeons. You were exploring them. It wasn't, this demonic overlord is going to take over the world in 2 weeks, so we have to go. It was, we're doing a job, and we have to plan out how we're doing a job.
Yeah, anything outside of the module was like player initiated because the GM was like, I don't know, I just got the module in front of me.
I mean, to a certain extent, that also means that if they decide to go into the dangerous thing that you shouldn't go into until your 12th level and their 3rd level, you as the DM were obligated to just murder them because this was early in the game and you need to teach them how to play the game.
You know, it's sad to say, but I have been there and done that. It wasn't even our fault. The GM grabbed the wrong module. Is this a new concept, the idea of incorporating player ideas into the game? Or is this something that happened on the regular in the old times?
It's hard to say specifically because I would need to do what I usually do and do some really deep digging research into it. But I know as we got into like the Dungeon Masters series in the 2nd edition, like the blue handbooks that were telling you how to build your campaigns and everything, there was a lot more of at least saying, hey, touch base with your players to see if they would like to do this type of thing. It wasn't talking about them contributing major things, but it was at least, soliciting the idea that if your players say they don't like something, maybe don't do it, which was kind of radical in AD&D 2nd edition.
Yeah. A lot of people think games are kind of developed in a vacuum, that D&D is created without any influence from any other game, or that some other game is created without any other influence from any other game. There are way more of us out there playing all the games as much as we can, that there is bound to be design concept bleed over from all of these things. And there are a lot of games out there that are designed in ways that promote the GM to include the ideas of the player, to source the table, or even just more broadly build the game collaboratively. One of the games I love to play and run is Monster of the Week. And Monster of the Week tells you to incorporate what your players are giving you in creating the whole world. There are plenty of games out there that they tend to be a little more on the indie story game side, but are completely built on the idea of the players give to the narrative as much as the GM does. And I think some of that, even if it doesn't make its way into the actual text of the games, makes its way into the philosophy of the people running the games.
And I do think the more there were player-focused customizations for players, the more you do see it being a natural extension to customize the game to those players. Because obviously in 1st edition, if somebody's playing a paladin, that does imply something different about the campaign. But if you ever rolled a paladin, you were a cheater.
And honestly, even if they didn't cheat to get the paladin, they were probably not somebody that you wanted to play the game with, because there's a reason people today in 2025 will refuse to play in a game with paladins.
Yeah.
And paladins haven't been like that in decades.
But I think like by the time you get to 2nd edition, and especially however much you may like them or not like them, but like once you start incorporating things like kits, where you are saying not just that I am a cleric, but I am a monastic cleric from an order of pacifists, that is starting to add more and more to the game world, that the DM either has to say, no, that's not a thing in my game world, or yes, I want to incorporate that, and that's going to be a thing, and this is how it looks.
Are there any tools or guidance in official D&D material about how to build off of the ideas of your players?
I am almost certain there are more things in ancillary books other than the DMG, but my brain always goes to the Dungeon Master's Guides first, because those ancillary books are not necessarily the things that people are reading when they're trying to learn how to run a game for the first time. And a lot of times, by the time somebody already has the idea to do different things with their campaign, those books aren't introducing them to those ideas. They're just kind of like nudging them in a certain direction. That having been said, there are things here and there. I mean, this may not seem like a huge thing, but like 4th edition and even the 2024 DMG talk about getting lists of, hey, what magic items would you like to find? Which sounds like a shopping list, but honestly, if your players are saying something like, I want to find a hammer of thunderbolts, that is also telling you something about how they envision their character. And you don't just want to throw a hammer of thunderbolts into like a kobold village. It is going to flavor like, okay, if I do incorporate this, this is moving along a certain epic theme that I should work with.
And I think to a certain degree, while it may not be explicitly said, as you were saying, your players are telling you a lot by the characters they choose to make. If your players choose to make a warlock, you need to consider who that patron is.
Mm-hmm.
If they choose a cleric, who is their deity? A lot of people can totally run their games and completely ignore those facets forever. But if you really want to lean into what the players are interested in, you can pull on those strings of that information that those players are giving you.
Yeah, there were, in 3rd edition, a lot of the prestige classes would have kind of implied sort of generic organizations, affiliated with those prestige classes. And I would run games into Forgotten Realms. So what I would do is, okay, how do I tie this to existing things in the game? And that was because a player said, I want to play this prestige class. I want this to be part of the story of my character. So then I look at that and say, okay, how can I change the campaign so this seems like something that we're not just hand waving and saying, yeah, there's probably some vague organization that is like that, but actually saying, no, this was an offshoot of the Harpers. It split off 20 years ago because of this. And, where it actually has some foundation in the setting and matters in the campaign a little bit more.
Look at what your players are giving you, both with the class they choose, the subclass they choose, the background they pick for the character, and any sort of backstory they give you. More often than not, they're telling you something they would be interested in seeing in the campaign at some point. Sometimes maybe not. Sometimes maybe not. Sometimes the player will be like, why are you bringing that into play? It's like, you made a character who was on the run from the Thieves Guild. I thought maybe throwing some thieves hunting you would be... No, I didn't want to do that. Generally speaking, that's what they're telling you.
And sometimes you make up 2 characters from classes that don't interact with arcane magic when your DM has a bunch of information about arcane magic, and he has to realign what types of magic get detailed in the campaign.
Some of what we've talked about has been kind of framed around the idea of GMs crafting their campaigns from scratch, doing it completely homebrew, or, maybe using a published setting, but still they're crafting everything together. What about for published campaigns? Can we incorporate player ideas into those, even though it's pretty scripted out from 1st level to 10th level or wherever that campaign is supposed to take you?
I think there have definitely been adventures, less so that I will point my finger at in 5th edition D&D, but adventures that I have read for other game systems that have literally said, if you have a character that has generally these same traits, use them instead of the NPC we're giving you. So, like, if the player character has, like, a favorite uncle that was their mentor, and there's a mentor character in the thing, you take that and use that thing that the player character gave, or that the player gave you, and add that into the adventure instead of what they gave you in the first place. I will say it is much handier when the adventure is written in such a way that they tell you that you can swap out certain NPCs, because that usually means there won't be something weird in this NPC's backstory that will completely throw you off if you try and incorporate an existing character instead of using one that is going to provide that twist for you.
I think there's this belief that using a published campaign is quote-unquote easier than crafting your own. And in some ways, that's not exactly true, because you still need to review what is in the campaign and figure out ways to make it matter to the players at your table. Make it matter to their characters. And that can be a place where you bring in the stuff that makes it important to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I'm doing both right now, and I do about the same amount of work for both, and it's just that in Curse of Strahd, I am not coming up with the plot. but I am coming up with how I'm going to customize it and what order to do things in and what I need to tweak in it. I'm not exactly sure how to present it. It is easier on parts of my brain that don't want to come up with a plot, but it is not easier on the parts of my brain that are going to be engaging with mechanics and thinking about other creative things that I want to connect, that just kind of spring out of nowhere. And also the things that the player characters came up with. The whole thing with my PCs starting off in the Witchlight Carnival, they didn't say they wanted to start in the Witchlight Carnival, but they did say they all wanted to play Fey characters. And, we kind of sprung from there.
Yeah, for me, the Depths of Zendrick campaign in Eberron's setting, so I've got material I can draw on, but that was completely me. That was just what I was. So I was pulling threads from the characters the players gave me throughout the whole thing. Now I'm running the old Margrave, and I'm still pulling on the threads that the players have given me with their characters, but it's a little different. Luckily, with the old Margrave, the opening hook on why the players go into the Margrave and do stuff is kind of left open. So the GM has to kind of craft that to hook the players. So I was able to design a whole bunch of stuff around that to make it make sense why they go into the forest and stumble across these adventures, which are loosely connected. You can easily plug and play them as you want, but I can still pull on the things from the players to make these more personal and more interesting to them. I struggled a little bit when I was running Dragon Heist, because there was a lot in that book that my players were not interested in. There's a whole chapter on faction stories and stuff you can engage in, and of the 6 players I had at the table, only one had a character tied to the factions, and she didn't give a crap. I kind of had to keep reminding her that she was playing a paladin, oath to the Lord's Alliance. It's like, you're not just some random thug, okay? I don't care how you're playing your paladin. You're still a paladin. That one was a little harder for me to work on getting all the stuff together. There was other issues with that campaign. It was fun, but my players nearly killed me.
It's funny because my Storm King's Thunder game was the exact opposite. There's a part in there where you're essentially assumed you're going to go to this Uthgard Barbarian Mound and find some giant artifact, and that giant artifact is going to lead you to one of the giant leaders, and from there you're going to end up going to the Storm Giants. It's assumed you go to one of the Uthgard mounds. My players decided, what if we went to all of them and found as many artifacts as we could, and that way we could decide which giant that we want to go visit. So there for a while, we were just going from Uthgard Mound to Uthgard Mound, and eventually I was just trying to nudge them back into, I know you're having fun with this, but there's a lot of Uthgard tribes.
Yeah. What methods have you used to incorporate your player ideas?
One thing, this is something that Chris does with us, is to ask people after you've had a game session, what did you like about this? What didn't you like? What do you want to see in the future?
Stars and wishes.
Exactly. When I would hear people talk about feedback and how, I want to ask you for anything you don't like, I am not always great about wanting to hear exactly in the moment that something went wrong, because I can internalize that poorly. I want to know if something went wrong, but I don't know that I want to know it right in the moment because I need time to process it.
Yeah.
I think people will tell you if something is a big problem. I don't know that you prompting them every time to ask for something that's a problem is going to make them more likely to tell you when they don't like something than they would if you didn't mention it and they just have to kind of wait and tell you about it.
Yeah. I think that's why Chris generally frames it as stars and wishes.
Mm-hmm.
It's the stars, what did you like? And wishes, what do you want to see more of? What do you want to see in the next session?
Yeah.
That type of thing.
And which is not me saying I don't want to hear if something goes poorly. I just don't want to pin people down the second we stop playing. What didn't you like? What's the problem? Tell me how to fix it.
Yeah, and there's a problem with that too. I find I have the same issue with lines and veils as a safety tool. It's sometimes when you put people on the spot with that type of question, there are certain people who are like, oh, I need to come up with something. I need to come up with something now. And it may not have even been a real problem. It may not even be something they really have an issue with. They just, because they've been put on the spot, they feel like they need to contribute.
I do like, because I've seen a lot more lately where there are things for Lines and Veils that will give examples that are contextual to like an adventure or a type of campaign. I think that actually works a lot better than just asking somebody out of the blue, what don't you want to see?
Yeah.
I can tell you, like, if you ask somebody about how they feel about child danger and you already frame it in terms of this gothic thing with Curse of Strahd, that is going to help them visualize, do I really want to see this or not?
Yeah.
I think that is a little bit different because you're already walking them somewhere down the path where they're in those shoes, as opposed to, we haven't decided anything about this campaign yet. What do you want to see and what don't you want to see?
Yeah, and the thing too is like, just because I don't necessarily want to I don't want to see child abuse in a game or anything like that, but saving a kid from something? Oh yeah, let me be the big damn hero. So it's like, sometimes it's like the threat of a thing is not the same as having it so deeply into the game that it's going to be a turnoff. You know what I mean?
But yeah, I think the wishes part of that Stars and Wishes is what, at least as far as the way I like to incorporate player feedback, that is the type of thing I want to hear. And I say it that way because when things are more improvisational, and I love PBTA games and I have run them a lot, but when I'm running D&D, I don't want, I want to improvise, but I want to improvise within a framework.
Exactly. I was going to bring this up. There are a lot of the kind of indie story games that encourage you to source the table for, tell me about this building, tell me about this person. And that can be a lot of fun, but I generally, when I'm running, don't want to deal with it, because there are times where players are going to give me something that isn't something I can work with, or it's counter to where I was trying to go with something. My question wasn't leading enough, or I ask it of a player who doesn't like answering those types of questions. It's the player who, like, you ask that and they freeze and they're like, I don't know. It's a two-story building made out of brick. It's not that they don't have imagination. Some of these players can be the most fantastic players to have at your table, but they may not have the improvisational creativity on demand in their brain to be able to contribute to that scene like that.
Yeah.
What I prefer instead is, at the beginning of a campaign, ask every player to give you 2 or 3 NPCs or locations that are important to their character. We did that with the Marodi campaign that Jared runs, and Gertie, the fence, has shown up several times. And I was just like, I don't know. I didn't think of any NPCs. Only NPC I thought of was Kazina's missing sister, and I don't want her coming in at this early of the campaign. A fence. There's a fence. Kazina works with a fence. She's a Dragonborn. I don't know. But she became a thing that became important in the campaign.
And it's definitely come up in the Marodi game, but where it really shined, in my opinion, was when we did the newspaper thing in Eberron, where everyone was working for the newspaper.
Yep.
And I had people come up with, like, people were telling me where they like to get breakfast in the morning. They were telling me about, like, where they had people that would give them leads on stories. It was great. There was just so much that I could build off of that, but I like having that information and having it sit there so that I can build on it when it makes sense, instead of trying to shove it in the minute it shows up.
Right.
And by no means am I saying that gaming with improvisation in the moment is bad, but what I'm saying is, when I'm running Masks, the PBTA game, if my players come up with a supervillain, the way that game works, I am a lot easier to say, yes, that's great. That's what, that supervillain shows up. This is exactly what they're like. I don't want to do that with, like, a demon lord in the middle of a D&D game.
Oh, no. And I mean, part of that comes down to the mechanics of the game. PBTA is a lot looser. It's a lot, like, there's not as many mechanics related to the characters. You can create an adversary with just a few words on a note card. A D&D adversary, their stat block is kind of important.
Yeah.
And coming up with that on the fly is like, oh boy, I needed some time to prepare for that.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about a villain in Masks, you have to know how many conditions they get inflicted on them before they're defeated.
Yeah. Most of my villains that I use in Masks are on, cards.
Mm-hmm.
It's a deck of card size, normal playing card size cards that have a villain on them. And I just pull one of those and I'm like, okay, I'm using this one for this session.
Yeah. And it is, and part of that isn't because one of those things is better than the other. It's because the mechanics are entertaining a different part of your creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And D&D is a role-playing game, but it is also a tactical role-playing game where there are decisions that matter that are constrained by the rules.
Now, this doesn't mean you can't do improvisational check-ins with your players during a session, usually on smaller things. Like, tell me how you know the bartender. Tell me about the last time you had to run from this city guard. Tell me the last time you came through this forest. You can call on your players to create those narrative elements for the game that help them flesh out their character a little bit. It's just there's certain areas where it's easier if you have the information ahead of time.
Yes, I think that is the thing with something as structured as D&D. It is having the ideas that you can work in eventually instead of trying to do it in the moment.
Right.
And I also think that helps. I think that that's true of players too. When you have those players that don't want to give you like, tell me what this inn is like and what they're famous for. And there's some players that just ground out if you do that. But if you tell them, hey, at some point, let me know some place where your mercenary used to hang out before they became an adventurer, they might be fine with that because it's not in the moment. You're not forcing them into a corner and saying, right now, come up with something.
Yeah. Are there times the actions or ideas of the players have changed where you were going with the campaign?
Oh, absolutely.
All the time.
Yeah. When you're talking about like long-term planning and how, once I have this information, it's going to work into that plan 3 or 4 sessions down the road. My players in my 3rd edition Forgotten Realms game, I had this idea that they were going to be heading into the Dale Lands after adventuring in Cormyr for a while, and that was kind of my main idea, and I knew a few places where I was going to point them to that were kind of dungeon places they could explore, and we ended up on this whole thing where the dwarf found a dwarven village and, like, was interested in this one merchant's daughter and gets incorporated into, like, their business, and the other character decided he wanted to build a temple to Helm in Mistledale, starts like trying to ingratiate himself with the people there to make sure that they're okay with him building this temple outside of their city and how it's going, or outside of the town, and how it's going to be used for their defense. And that just like those things became like cornerstones of where that campaign went.
I have joked before that there's the cartoon of, I think it's a Wallace and Gromit cartoon where they're on a little train and they're throwing the track down as the train goes. And I'm like, that's my GMing style. And it's not meant to say that I railroad my players. It's that I have no idea where we're going because I'm making it up as we go. So to say that things change direction, let's just say that when I run a campaign, I come up with the framework. I come up with the general sphere of where I need the PCs to be when we start. And then from there, I basically pull on those characters to create what comes later. So for example, with the old Margrave game, I basically said I need characters that would be willing and thrive going into the old forest. This is kind of where you're going to start. Give me characters that will work here. I did have to discourage one player who was looking at making a mechanist. And I'm like, I don't know that the mechanist is really going to work in this campaign. It's like, I don't want to tell you no, but I'm telling you, I don't know how well that's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So he switched gears and went with his other choice, which was a rogue. And I had no idea I was going to be doing anything with, a fiendish warlock patron and possibly things changing between who his fated patron and is whose patron becomes and all this. I had no idea that was going to become a storyline until the player gave me a warlock that was reluctantly assigned to a patron. I had no idea I was going to be leaning into any of the Fae stuff until I had 2 players give me an elf and a half-elf from the other side of the continent who suddenly felt called to come here. It's like, none of that was in place until the players gave it to me.
I also think there is something to be said for when players throw something out there and they don't necessarily mean for you, you have to use this. But there are times when a player will say, that would be so cool if that was X. And sometimes it makes perfect sense to say, it actually is. You are correct. I mean, there are times when it is just perfect, and you should not be afraid to run with that if it all aligns. Now, if it's going to throw off your entire mindset for what direction people are going and your entire concept for the campaign, don't try and do it. But if it is something that is like, oh, there is an empty spot right over here in the campaign that suggestion will fit into nicely, then just do it. We've talked about this before, too. There are times when it's like, I kind of have an idea who the master villain is and what their plan is, but the players came up with this really neat conspiracy, and I think that sounds better, so I think they're right.
I'm also going to say that back in the day, we were encouraged to write backgrounds.
Yeah.
2 pages of backstory for your character. On one hand, I really enjoyed doing that. It's a great creative writing exercise. Helps me figure out who these characters is. It is heartbreaking to write that backstory and then never have the GM use anything from it.
Yes.
Or completely ignore it. I've had that happen too. Write a backstory and then the GM completely starts doing stuff that are completely counter to the backstory. And I'm like, no, that's not where... Okay, I guess that's where we're going with this right now. And just, there goes the backstory out the window.
And honestly, I think that is another issue that I kind of had with like bonds, flaws, traits, those things in backgrounds from 2014. They weren't simple enough to keep them in your head easily, but they were just long enough that like you would completely like, it's something vague is true about this person, I think. Maybe it had to do with monkeys, I don't know.
Well, and there was also the thing that they're supposed to be there for the GM to grant you inspiration when they come up and you lean into them. As a GM, I am not going to be able to memorize the bonds, flaws, traits, and the 4th one, whatever it was. I'm not going to be able to memorize the 4 of them for one character, let alone 4 to 6 characters.
Yeah.
This
is something, it goes into having run Fate for a while. There was no way I was remembering everybody's aspects.
No.
The good thing about Fate is that people can invoke their own traits, and after a while, you would start remembering them because those were the things they were invoking themselves.
Yeah.
That's not how those work in D&D because you're not invoking them yourself, and you might, but that's not really what it tells you to do. It doesn't tell you as a player to say, hey, DM, I just did this thing. And the problem is, the players that are more likely to do that are more likely to spam it and try and do it at times when I don't know that is really what that thing is about. To the broader point, I think backstories are much better when you can bullet point them.
Yes. Come into the game with a paragraph or some bullet points. Give the GM something that they can easily pull on if they need to, or it's just a good reference for you. Make sure it has space to fill in stuff as you go. Which leads me to my next question. What are some of your favorite additions to a campaign that came directly from your players?
Oh, I mean, directly, but maybe not intentionally. My players had latched on to this one adventuring company, and it was a paladin of Sunni, and he was like completely happy-go-lucky all the time, and he just drove them nuts for some reason. Like, not the usual paladin driving people nuts. It was just like, this guy is way too pretty and way too happy, and like adventuring is hard, serious business. It was funny. It was one of those things where they liked interacting with them, but they liked disliking interacting with them in character. And I am terrible and decided to rip their hearts out at one point in time. There was this big major conflict going on where they had to decide between someone needs to go do this one thing and someone else needs to do this other thing. And you have 2 adventuring parties here. What are you going to do? And they were like, I can't trust anyone else to do this, so I'm going to ask them to go do this thing. And that other party ended up dying, fighting off a green dragon that had attacked the town. And they died heroes. Like, they did exactly what they were supposed to do, and it just killed the party because it was like, they were exactly who they said they were, and now I feel like crap.
In my original Eberron game, I had 2 characters who had connections to House Lyrandar. Kelson was a dragon-marked heir. He was part of the family, pretty high up. He had the dragon mark. He was expected to become a responsible member of the house in the future. All he really wanted to do was go on adventuring and be a hedonist. So he was doing that while he still could. Mindarin, on the other hand, was a human who had basically grown up with House Lyrindar, but ended up realizing that he was never going to get the respect he wanted as part of the house because he wasn't a half-elf. So he left and joined the mercenary company, and that's where they met. They didn't have any connections really in their past other than they were both related to House Lyrindar. Fast forward many levels, they're back in the north. They need to get a ship to go to Ice White Island. They contract with a House Lyrindar ship. And on it, I said, was Kelson's kid sister, who, member of House Lyrindar, is working on this ship to kind of gain her knowledge and all this. And the players started talking, and what they decided was that Mindarin had actually served on a ship with Kelson's kid sister years ago, and they had been lovers. And so they get on the ship, and there's Kelson's kid sister, and she's like, hey, Kelson. It's like, oh, Mindarin, I haven't seen you in years. And it's like, oh, wait, how do you know my kid sister? What are we talking about here? And it was like, they were good friends. They worked through it, but it was still this fun role play that they added to it that created this whole new dynamic that I wouldn't have really cared who was on the ship other than they made House Lyrindar related characters, so House Lyrindar characters were going to be on the ship. You know, there's so many little things like that from running games that I just love because the players help create that stuff.
So, Ange, I have a question that popped up to me while we were going through all of these, and that is, how have things changed as far as overtly having the players give you stuff to work into the campaign versus taking stuff and not necessarily telling them that you're mining their ideas to put in your campaign? Because I think that's a big difference between earlier editions of D&D, where even when they did tell you take stuff from your players and add it in, DMs were still encouraged to be like, never tell people how you do this stuff. Act like you always had this in mind. And now I think we are, especially because of other RPGs too, we are much more likely to see people saying, no, ask your players literally for stuff that will be in the campaign later.
Yeah, it's very much the way running games was treated for so many years was like the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Don't look behind the curtain. In fact, there are still people today who will get mad if you basically say you told your players how you did something or why you did something. And it's like, oh, you're breaking the immersion. You're ruining the verisimilitude. You're going to ruin it all for your players. It's like, no, I'm not going to do it in the middle of the game. I'm not going to ruin the emotion and the tension and all of that that's happening in the middle of the game. But afterwards, totally. I love talking to my players about why I did a thing or what the intended, the intended use of a particular thing was for a scene. And I do this because I want more people to understand GMing concepts.
Yeah.
You know, nobody learned how to GM when it was all hidden behind a curtain. You know, the reason I did not GM when I first started playing was because I knew my players, my friends, would have eaten me alive. Because I'm a cream puff. They would have pushed me over and basically taken the wheels off of my campaign and left it to sit there in the dust as they jacked it up and ran off with the wheels. I think that metaphor got away from me.
I think something that I grew up with, and I am old, but I am not as old as the people that first created the game, and that is, I grew up in this era where you were seeing these specials showing, like, how did they do the special effects on Star Wars? I remember there were people at that time going, I don't want to know how that works. It's like, I don't care. I can see people puppeting Jabba the Hutt and not look at the scene and go, that's really cool. Like that, I wasn't constantly thinking there's 3 guys in there moving him around because I just thought it was cool seeing how they did it after the fact. And I think there was that it's kind of that difference in how GMing was presented. It's like, here, read the DMG. Don't let anyone know your secrets unless they pledge to run their own game. And even then,
I was not allowed to look at the DMG. I was a player.
Yeah.
It was not my place to look at the DMG.
You are correct. There is a certain mindset that kind of took hold where it was like everything outside of literally who the player characters are is yours. So do not let the players think they have any input into how the world works at all. I remember discussions about that in 3rd edition, which, while longer ago than I would like to admit, is not as long ago as the ancient days of, AD&D.
Now, I will say there are times when you don't want players trying to take control of a narrative. I don't think I've ever had this happen in a D&D game, but I have had it happen in other games where a player will come in and be used to those story games where other, players can push along the narrative, and they'll say a thing happens, and I'm like, no, that doesn't happen, because that's not where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
A Tales from the Loop game, little tiny robots running around. I have a scene where the players are supposed to capture one of these little robots, and this player, totally into this I'm going to suggest a narrative, is basically like, oh, and I try and grab it and I miss and it runs down the drain and gets away. And I'm like, no, because I need you to get your hands on it here. So it's kind of like, so there are times where that level of contribution can be hard to handle. You have to find your point of flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
What type of advice can we offer people running games on how to try and incorporate more from their players?
So I think one of the big things is kind of keep an eye out for areas where you are okay with changing things in the campaign. Know where there are things that are so intrinsic to what you want to do, you can't bend them, but also look around and see, okay, there's some things here that if they don't have an idea, I know how it's going to go, but if they have an idea, I'll run with theirs because it doesn't matter one way or the other.
Work with your players on what their ideas and figure out how to fit it into the world. The City of Cows campaign, very much a collaborative affair between Tristan, the GM, and us, the players, even though it is his homebrew world that he has been running since the early 90s. In the 4th edition game, I was like, I want to play a Changeling Rogue. Can I play a Changeling Rogue? And he thought about it for a few minutes. He'd never considered having changelings in the game. Came up with an idea. We talked about it. And all of a sudden, there's now this whole backstory of what changelings are in the world that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have said I wanted to play this. Same thing with the Indus campaign. Suddenly, we understand who the Northmen are, the Viking-like societies, because one of the players wanted to play one. We know more about the Drow and how they're not necessarily from the Underdark, they're from the Shadowfell. All these things that happened and got incorporated into the game because these are what the players brought to the table. I mean, there's the whole thing with the half angel on Rumspringa because the player wanted to make an Aasimar warlock who was basically getting his wings, so to speak. Like all of this happened and became an integral part of the campaign because that's what the players brought to the campaign. And the GM was cool enough to go, okay, I'm going to take your ideas and I'm going to build it into the fabric of this world.
Another thing I would say is don't force ideas. If someone has a good idea, hold on to it and put it where it's going to make the most impact. Because if you try and force a good idea too fast, it's not going to have the same impact. And if you want your players to feel like that thing that they offered up is really mattering, you want to hang on to it until it is going to be like a centerpiece where you can see, hey, here's the thing that you did, and it makes sense where it's at. And I think kind of going along with that is have a good place to capture your player ideas if you're not going to use them right away. I won't necessarily tell you exactly what to do. It might be having a notebook. It might be having spreadsheets like I do because I have 347 spreadsheets with ideas in them. But have some place where you capture those ideas so you don't just trust your brain to bring them back up later on. You trust something other than your own memory.
I would say also is one other piece of advice here. Know how your players deal with this type of stuff. as I mentioned, I have a player who doesn't deal with the improv level of stuff. He also doesn't like losing control of his character. And sometimes that is related to bringing some stuff from his backstory into play.
Mm-hmm.
In the original Eberron campaign, I brought his younger brother into play as the captain of a ship that they needed to hire to go do something. And he was not happy with it. He's like, I don't like this. And it was like, but it's your backstory. He wanted his backstory to stay in his backstory.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he didn't necessarily want, so it's just sometimes some players deal with things a little different. So know your players.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I do not regret bringing his younger brother in because it developed an interesting kind of dynamic in the story. But when I initially did it, he was just like, I don't like this. He's like, I don't know why my brother is here. I don't want to deal with my brother. Why is my brother here? Shouldn't he be off doing this other thing that I said in my backstory he was doing? It's like, time, my dude, time and changes. And hey, it's your backstory. I thought you'd like it, but you figure these things out as you go.
And since we're talking about players, I think another thing that's really important is if you're going to incorporate player ideas, make sure that you don't have players dominating by giving you a bunch of ideas that you run with all the time while other players just kind of sit there and almost kind of seethe because it's like the DM and this player's campaign and the rest of us are just here for the ride.
It's not even that always happens on purpose.
Right.
It's not necessarily the GM having a favorite that they always cater to and use their ideas. That does happen. But that is not always what's happening here. Sometimes it's like that player's on a roll. They've got a bunch of creative ideas. They're very simpatico with the GM. Their ideas fit with what the GM has. And other players may not be pitching in enough. They may not be pitching in much at all. It's like they may not have the bandwidth to do that. So you as the GM need to make sure that use that player's stuff that they're giving you that's really cool, but also make sure you circle back to the other characters and make sure you're giving them some love and attention as well. Spotlight management.
It's spotlight management, and also it's a good reason to kind of formally have that time where you say, hey, is there anything you want to see in the campaign? Because if you're doing that, you're intentionally making sure that you're reinforcing, I want to hear from all of you. It's not just, hey, does one of you have a good idea? And we'll run with that forever.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research, where they do the work so we don't have to.
Every episode, we're going to look for something related to D&D that we want to pass along to the listeners. It might be podcasts, products, websites, videos, but it will always be something that we think will enhance your D&D experience. But before we do that, we have our Eldritch Invocation. We've got a Patreon now, so if you would like to help us do this show and provide some additional content for you, we would love it if you decided to join. We've got our own Discord. We'll be releasing additional supplementary material, like things from our Heroes of Havel's Way campaign, sort of, spells, class features, magic items. We've got all sorts of things. Chris made companion classes. There's tons of stuff there, so please become our patron. Let us shoot Eldritch bolts out because of you.
Okay, for me this week, I gotta be honest, I always struggle with coming up with something to say here. Jared is far more plugged into the wider world of gaming stuff out there. But hey, today I've got something that actually fits with something I was saying earlier in the episode. Ginny D dropped a video talking about how to be a dungeon master for total beginners. As you probably gathered from earlier in the episode, this is something I'm very passionate about. I spent way too long longing for a game without understanding that I could have run that game. Maybe not back in the 90s, because they really would have eaten me alive, but there was no reason I couldn't have tried to run a game back then. I want more people to know that they can totally run a game if they have the interest and the desire. And Ginny D breaks this down really nicely in her video with her typical humor and all of that. We'll have a link in the show notes. It was just a perfectly timed video for stuff I was thinking about.
What's this? We have a redacted section? Yeah, I hear you, Jared. Okay, no, I can get rid of it. That's fine. Everybody, this section's been redacted. Jared said that the people that he was going to give a shout-out to were poopy heads, and they needed to have their stuff redacted, so I redacted it. If you want to find out what was redacted or why it might have been redacted, feel free to join our Discord. I'm sure Jared will tell you. Now, let's get back on with the show.
We are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast like...
The Gnome Cast. Several gnomes from Gnome Stew get together to talk about gaming topics and themselves in an effort to entertain you and avoid being thrown in the stew.
Hey, that sounds familiar.
Does.
We have used up all of our resources, so I think it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you, and we hope you go exploring with us when we start our next adventure. And